Usually when we talk about evolution, there's this expectation of deep time.
Right, yeah. Like geology.
Exactly, like geology. You picture, I don't know, fish slowly
Hmm.
over countless millennia growing legs and just kind of crawling onto land, or early hominids gradually, generation after generation, learning to walk upright.
Yeah, it's a process measured in millions of years. It's not fast.
It's not, it's slow. And in a weird way, it's comforting.
Right.
We like to think of evolution as this incredibly sluggish, almost imperceptible background process, something we can safely observe from a distance behind the glass of a museum exhibit.
Right, behind safety glass.
Yeah. But today, for this deep dive, if you're joining us, we are looking at a biological landscape where the evolutionary clock just isn't ticking in millions of years. It's terrifyingly fast. It is happening in real time.
It is the absolute definition of an evolutionary nightmare, honestly. I mean, what happens when the apex predator doesn't just naturally select over epochs, but actively, consciously adapts to its prey in, a matter of decades?
And that is exactly what we're digging into right now. We are exploring a galaxy that is caught completely, devastatingly off guard by an enemy that learned how to strategize on the fly. So we're looking at the historical accounts of the Tyranid alien race specifically, the rise of what is known in the sources as Hive Kraken.
Which is just a fascinating, terrifying shift.
Oh, completely. And if you are listening to this right now expecting a standard, straightforward, mindless alien swarm attacks humanity type of story, you just need to throw that out the window. We are stepping into what is essentially a complex, high-stakes tactical thriller today.
Yeah, it's not a monster movie anymore.
Right. We're tracking an apex predator that doesn't just eat you. It analyzes the specific ways you try to defend yourself and then rewrites its own genetic code to bypass those exact defenses.
Which is a masterclass in adaptive intelligence.
Today, we aren't just mapping out a military history. We are analyzing the mechanics of a literal biological learning engine. So to start, before we can really understand the sheer terror of Hive Kraken, we have to set the baseline. We have to understand what they evolved from.
Exactly, the before picture.
Right, the before picture. To appreciate the leap in intelligence, we have to look back about 250 years before Kraken ever showed up to the arrival of their predecessor, which was Hive Fleet Behemoth.
And that 250-year gap is really the crucial variable here. I mean, to a human, that's multiple lifespans. But on a galactic scale, and certainly on a biological evolutionary scale, 2.5 centuries it's less than a blink of an eye.
So when Behemoth first hit the galaxy, it was humanity's, and by humanity I mean this massive, sprawling, million-world empire known as the Imperium of Man. It was their very first encounter with the Tyranids. And Behemoth was described in all the sources as a brutal hammer blow.
Yeah, there was no nuance to Behemoth at all.
None. Zero. It was a single, massive, unified fleet of biological ships acting as a galactic battering ram. It just drew a straight line toward its targets and charged.
Yeah, Behemoth's strategy was entirely reliant on overwhelming mass and forward momentum. If we break down the mechanics of an actual battering ram, the logic is incredibly simple, right? Apply maximum kinetic force to a single point until the structural integrity of the target fails.
Just smash it till it breaks.
Exactly. In biological terms, it was a straightforward equation for the Tyranids. Bring more bodies, more teeth, more claws, and more acid than the enemy has bullets and defensive lasers. It was the purest expression of a swarm driven by a singular consuming hunger.
So they didn't try to flank systems or anything.
No, they didn't employ any kind of subterfuge. They just pushed forward, absorbing casualties by the billions, honestly, until the prey was crushed under just the sheer weight of numbers.
Okay, but a battering ram has a fundamental flaw, right? Like if the wall you are hitting is thick enough, and if the defenders know exactly where the ram is going to strike, they can reinforce that one specific spot.
Yes, they can brace for the impact.
And that's exactly what the Imperium of Man did. They had this incredibly vast military, and because Behemoth came in as one giant concentrated mass, the Imperium was able to concentrate all of their own immense firepower into that single point of contact.
Precisely. The Imperium met the hammer with an anvil, basically. They drew a line in the sand at a heavily fortified world, massed their fleets, their planetary defense grids, their elite transhuman soldiers, and they just broke the battering ram.
It was a win.
It was. Behemoth was destroyed. I mean, it was a Pyrrhic victory for the defenders, causing unimaginable devastation, but the Tyranid threat was seemingly neutralized.
But here is the terrifying part. 2.5 centuries later, Kraken arrives. And Kraken is a completely different beast.
Completely different.
It is a calculated hunter. The defining characteristic of Kraken isn't a single massive fleet. It's speed, its predatory cunning, and the use of multiple decentralized outflanking tendrils.
The tendril approach changes everything.
It really does. It's like fighting a heavyweight boxer who just tries to punch through a brick wall with raw strength. You barely manage to survive and beat him. But then for the rematch, he doesn't just come back stronger. He shows up knowing Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and he brings a highly coordinated pack of wolves to attack you from every angle while he puts you in a chokehold.
That is a very accurate analogy. That shift from a single mass to a decentralized network is just profound. We have to ask ourselves, how does an alien intelligence process defeat?
Right, because they don't think like we do.
No, they don't.
Well, if we look at the mechanics of the Tyranids, they operate on a hive mind, right? It's a psychic, synaptic web connecting trillions of organisms across light years.
Yeah, they share one consciousness.
So when Behemoth was annihilated, the hive mind didn't experience it as a military defeat. It experienced it as an incredibly expensive sensory ping.
That is exactly the mechanism. The death of Behemoth was not a failure to them. It was a massive data collection exercise. Think about the telemetry the hive mind absorbed in its dying moments. It learned about the energy yields of planetary defense lasers. It mapped the response times of the Imperium's naval fleets. It learned about the tactical doctrines of human soldiers.
So it's taking notes while it's dying?
Exactly. The hive mind absorbed all that data and then went into a 250-year period of intense processing, genetic reengineering, and strategic recalibration.
So they realize that a single mass is a single target. It's a single point of failure. If you bring all your forces to one fight, the enemy can bring all their guns to one fight.
Right, which is what the Imperium is best at.
So by shifting to these multi-pronged tendrils, Kraken is basically weaponizing logistics against the Imperium. You can't mass your defenses if you are being attacked in 100 different star systems simultaneously.
They evolved from applying blunt force trauma to applying strategic constriction. By splintering into tendrils, they stretch the defender's supply lines to the breaking point. They force an empire that is notoriously slow, bureaucratic, and centralized to fight a highly decentralized, fluid war.
But the evolution doesn't stop at fleet formations. And this is where the story shifts, for me at least, from a military history into pure psychological horror.
Oh, absolutely. This is the scariest part.
Because Kraken learned that a direct frontal assault, trying to break down the reinforced front door of a fortress world, was inefficient. So they developed a mechanism to unlock the door from the inside long before the fleet even arrived.
Yeah, the physical arrival of Hive Fleet Kraken in a solar system was almost always preceded by a wave of inexplicable systemic collapse on the target planet.
What kind of collapse?
Sudden rebellions, widespread terrorism, industrial sabotage, highly defended fortress worlds were destabilizing from the inside out, and initially the planetary governors and security forces had absolutely no idea it was connected to an extraterrestrial threat.
Which makes sense. Why would you link a labor strike to aliens?
Right, exactly.
So the Imperium has this internal security apparatus known as the Inquisition. These are the secret police, and specifically the Ordozinos, who are dedicated to hunting aliens. And when they finally started investigating these uprisings, they discovered it wasn't random civil unrest. It was the work of something called a gene stealer cult.
A horrifying concept.
Truly. Now, we need to spend some time on this because when I first read about this in the sources, it completely broke my brain a little bit. We are talking about biological space locusts here.
Yeah, bugs.
Bugs? How on earth does a predator without a localized command structure coordinate a complex internal political and social rebellion on a planet they haven't even reached yet?
To understand this, we have to completely discard our preconceived notions of what a biological weapon looks like. We usually think of a pathogen, a virus that kills the host.
Right, like Ebola or something.
Yeah. But a dead host can't sabotage a planetary defense laser. The Tyranids achieved this through a highly advanced, multi-generational biological infiltration. It starts with a single organism called a gene stealer, which slips onto a populated world, often stowing away on a cargo freighter.
Okay, so patient zero is this alien creature hiding in the dark. Just one bug in a cargo bay. How does it start a whole cult?
Through an infection process called the gene stealer's kiss.
Creepy name.
Very. The organism implants a retrovirus into a human host. But this virus is a masterpiece of genetic engineering. It doesn't destroy the host's DNA. It seamlessly rewrites it.
Wait, so it doesn't kill them?
No. It subtly alters their neurochemistry. The infected human doesn't mutate into a monster immediately. Instead, they become obsessively fanatically loyal to the gene stealer, which they now perceive as a messianic figure, a patriarch.
Wow, so they are weaponizing biology to create a sociological weapon. They are hacking the human capacity for devotion.
Exactly. It operates very much like a highly advanced polymorphic computer virus. Well, a basic virus just deletes your files and crashes your computer, right? That's a traditional disease. But a sophisticated malware package infects your system, rewrites the boot sequence, and turns your own antivirus software into a tool for its propagation, all while hiding perfectly within the background processes.
So the person just goes to work the next day.
The human host goes back to their life, completely unaware that their genetic code and their free will have been rewritten by an alien algorithm.
And then they reproduce.
Yes. And this is where the generational cycle becomes genuinely terrifying. The infected host breeds and their offspring are the first generation of hybrids.
Okay, what do they look like?
These creatures are monstrous, highly alien, and have to be kept hidden in the deepest, darkest parts of the planet's infrastructure, which, on Imperial worlds, usually means the underhives.
All right, let's clarify that for the listener really quick. A lot of worlds in the Imperium are what they call hive worlds. These are planets covered in cities that stretch miles into the sky and miles underground, housing billions or even trillions of people. The upper spires are for the elites, but the underhives are these massive, toxic, forgotten industrial zones at the very bottom.
It is the perfect blind spot for a cult to grow.
So they just hide the monster babies down there.
It is the ideal petri dish, and as the generations progress, the genetics shift. The second and third generations look less like monsters and more like mutated humans.
Like hunched over, maybe weird skin.
Yeah, odd ridges, maybe an extra limb they hide under a heavy coat. But by the fourth generation, the hybrids look almost entirely human. They are highly intelligent, charismatic, and psychically linked to the patriarch.
They pass for normal.
Completely. They are the ones who can leave the underhive. They infiltrate the labor unions. They join the planetary defense forces. They infiltrate the local government and religious institutions.
Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, why don't they just scan everyone for alien DNA? It's important to understand the scale we're dealing with. The Imperium is a bloated, bureaucratic nightmare. They aren't running genetic screenings on the trillions of factory workers toiling in the dark.
No, they don't care enough about those workers to test them.
Exactly. So by the time the fourth generation is active, this cult isn't a few weirdos in a basement. It is a massive, highly organized shadow society, deeply embedded in the planet's critical infrastructure.
And all of this operates entirely autonomously.
Wait, without the Hive fleet telling them what to do.
Right. The Hive fleet could be 100 years away. The cult's biological imperative, programmed into their very DNA, is simply to multiply, to gather resources, to stockpile weapons, and most importantly, to generate a psychic beacon.
A psychic beacon.
Yeah, the larger the cult grows, the brighter the psychic signal becomes in the warp, which is the alternate dimension used for interstellar travel and communication. This beacon acts as a lighthouse, drawing the Hive fleet directly to their world.
It's just chillingly brilliant. By the time the skies darken with Tyranid spore pods, the trap has already been sprung from the inside.
The world is already doomed.
Yeah. The planetary defense lasers you were relying on, sabotaged by the planet's own engineers, the local military, they are already fighting a brutal civil war against their own citizens.
The defenders are exhausted, their supply lines are cut, their leadership has been assassinated by sleeper agents.
And then, and only then, does the actual monster show up at the door. I mean, to see this invisible invasion strategy in action, we really have to look at one of those famous and devastating conflicts of this era, which is the Ishar V campaign.
Ishar V is the perfect, tragic case study for this. It perfectly illustrates how Kraken weaponized human sociology.
So Ishar V was a vital industrial world for the Imperium, and the prelude to the Tyranid invasion was a massive rebellion. But the gene stealer cult on this planet didn't just operate as a generic political uprising. They hid themselves inside a powerful, pre-existing theocratic group known as the Brotherhood.
That was their stroke of genius.
Right. It became such a massive problem that the Inquisition, specifically Inquisitor Agmar and a chapter of Space Marines known as the Ultramarines, were called in. And when they arrived, they honestly thought they were just dealing with a standard human uprising.
They walked into the trap completely blind.
Because rebellions happen all the time, right?
Yeah, the Imperium deals with planetary rebellions constantly. Heresy, secession, tax evasion, it's par for the course. So when the Ultramarines deployed, they were executing a standard counterinsurgency operation against human rebels.
But I want to pause here and look at the mechanism of this trap. Why hide the alien DNA inside a religious organization? It's not just for cover, is it?
No, it's far more insidious than simply wearing a disguise. Think about the structural mechanics of a theocratic cult or a highly dogmatic religion. What does it rely on?
Unquestioning obedience.
It relies on absolute devotion. It relies on a rigid, unquestioning hierarchy. It demands blind faith from its followers. And crucially, it thrives on isolation from outside, secular questioning.
Ah, I see. So if a member of the Brotherhood starts acting strangely, or, suddenly donates all of their wealth to the church leadership, or dedicates their entire life to meditating in the Underhive temples, the broader society doesn't flag that as a biological alien infection.
Exactly. Society just sees religious zealotry.
They just think, oh, he found God.
Yes. The Tyranids use humanity's own inherent propensity for faith and dogmatism as camouflage for a genetic infection. They hid inside human nature.
That is wild.
If a worker is working 20-hour shifts without complaint because the Brotherhood demands it, the factory overseer is happy. He doesn't know that worker is a fourth-generation hybrid stockpiling munitions for the apocalypse.
So Inquisitor Agmar and the Ultramarines start cracking open the Brotherhood, and they eventually discover the horrifying truth. But by the time they realize it's a gene-stealer cult, it's too late. The psychic beacon has done its job. Kraken descends from the stars. And this forces an incredibly brutal two-front war.
Militarily speaking, a two-front war where one front is inside your own house is a nightmare scenario.
I can't even imagine.
The planetary defenders had to point their anti-orbital batteries at the sky, bracing for the biological rain of the Hive fleet. But the very ground they were standing on, the logistical networks they relied on to bring ammunition to the guns, suddenly erupted. Thousands upon thousands of gene-stealer hybrids poured out of the underhives.
So the defenders are literally caught in a vice. Now, the Ultramarines are involved, and we need to explain who they are really quickly because it contextualizes the cost of this war. Space Marines aren't just regular soldiers. They are genetically engineered transhuman super soldiers.
The best of the best.
Right. They wear massive power armor. They are practically immortal in terms of age, possessing centuries of combat experience. They are the apex of human military might. And the Ultramarines eventually win the Battle of Echar IV. They break the back of the Tyranid invasion. But the historical accounts explicitly state that this victory came at a horrific cost. It completely shattered their first company.
We cannot understate the significance of that loss. To understand why, you have to look at the structure of a Space Marine chapter.
How big is a chapter?
A chapter is only about 1,000 warriors. The first company consists of the absolute elite 100 veterans.
So just 100 guys.
Just 100. But these are warriors who have survived hundreds of years of constant warfare. They wear suits of Terminator armor, which are ancient, irreplicable relics from a bygone era of technology that the Imperium largely doesn't even know how to manufacture anymore.
So losing the first company isn't like losing a battalion of fresh recruits. It's like losing 100 elite special forces operatives who are also carrying priceless historical artifacts and taking centuries of institutional knowledge to the grave with them.
Precisely. The Tyranids, on the other hand, operate on a completely different economic scale of warfare. They can replace 1 billion lost organisms in a matter of weeks simply by consuming the biomass of a nearby jungle moon.
They just eat some trees and make more bugs.
Exactly. The hive mind doesn't care if 1 million Gaunts die to kill one Space Marine, because biological matter is infinitely recyclable to them. The Imperium cannot recycle a 400-year-old veteran.
So even when humanity wins, they lose.
It is an asymmetric war of attrition. Kraken proved that even in defeat, it could inflict wounds on the Imperium's most elite forces that would take generations to heal. The Tyranids are perfectly designed to win over the long term because their currency is biomass, while the Imperium's currency is time and lost technology.
That is deeply sobering. And it gets worse, because remember how we talked about Kraken splintering into multiple tendrils?
Yes, the decentralized strategy.
While the Imperium of Man was bleeding out on Echar IV, paying this unimaginable generational cost just to hold the line, they weren't the only ones fighting for their lives. Another massive tendril of Kraken was simultaneously targeting a completely different galactic faction.
Which really demonstrates the overwhelming multitasking processing power of the hive mind.
Yeah, let's shift our focus to the Eldari and the doom of Iyanden.
This is a critical pivot in our analysis. The conflict on Echar IV shows us how Kraken weaponized human sociology and physical logistics. But the assault on the Eldari craft world of Iyanden shows us a completely different kind of horror, a profound spiritual devastation.
For our listeners who might not be familiar with the Eldari, they are an incredibly ancient, highly advanced alien race. They used to rule the galaxy millions of years ago, but their empire collapsed in a massive cataclysm. Now the survivors are basically refugees, and many of them live on craft worlds.
A craft world is a concept that defies human scale.
It's basically a planet, right?
Sort of. Imagine an entire continent, complete with mountains, forests, and sprawling cities, encased in a teardrop-shaped spacecraft drifting through the void. It is the last bastion of a dying civilization.
And one of the largest and most prosperous of these was Craft World Ayondon. A massive tendril of high-fleet Kraken slammed into Ayondon. The physical defenses of the craft world were completely overwhelmed. The Tyranid swarm was just too massive, and this forced the Eldari into an act of absolute, unthinkable desperation.
I had no choice.
To avoid total annihilation, the living Osiriani, that's the Eldari of the craft world, were forced to fight alongside their dead.
It was a catastrophic breach of their most sacred traditions, driven by the pure mathematics of survival.
Let's unpack the mechanics of this, because it revolves around something called a spirit stone. The accounts say the Eldari plucked these spirit stones from their resting places and inserted them into Wraithbone war constructs, essentially giant robotic bodies to fight the Tyranids.
Yes.
Now, from a purely human utilitarian perspective, drafting your reserves to survive makes sense. But the historical texts call this tomb robbing and frame it as a distasteful act of necromancy.
Right.
Wait, if you're facing literal biological extinction, if the alternative is every man, woman, and child being dissolved into acid and fed to a space bug, why is this framed as such a profound tragedy? Isn't waking up the ghost robots just a cool tactical advantage? Why are the Eldari so devastated by something that mathematically saved their civilization?
That is exactly the question we need to answer, because it highlights the fundamental difference between human and Eldari psychology. You are looking at it through a lens of pragmatic survival. To understand the tragedy of Ayondon, we have to explore the mechanics of Eldari spirituality and what a spirit stone actually is.
Okay, so it's not just a memorial plaque or a flash drive with some memories on it.
Not at all. For an Eldari, death is not a peaceful end. When their ancient empire collapsed, it birthed a dark, cosmic entity in the warp, a predatory god that constantly hungers for their souls.
Wait, a literal god?
A cosmic entity, yes. If an Eldari dies unprotected, their soul is instantly consumed by this entity, subjecting them to eternal, unimaginable torment.
Oh, that is horrifying. So how do they protect themselves from that?
With the spirit stones. These are psychically resonant gems worn on their chests. At the moment of death, the stone acts as a trap, catching the soul before it can be pulled into the warp. When a warrior dies, their stone is carefully retrieved and brought back to the craft world, where it is plugged into something called the Infinity Circuit.
The Infinity Circuit, what is that, like a giant server farm for souls?
Conceptually, yes. It is the skeletal infrastructure of the craft world itself, made of a psychoreactive material called Wraithbone. Inside the Infinity Circuit, the souls of the dead mingle, communicate, and rest. It is a collective, peaceful afterlife, a safe haven.
Okay, I'm starting to see the horror here. So a spirit stone contains the literal, conscious feeling soul of their ancestor.
Precisely. Now, imagine the sensory experience of what happened on Ayondon. You have an ancestor resting peacefully in the communal warmth of the Infinity Circuit. Suddenly, they are violently ripped out of that afterlife. They are thrust into the cold, mechanical shell of a wraith construct.
The ghost robot.
Yes, but the construct doesn't have human senses. The soul inside experiences a terrifying sensory deprivation. They can't feel the wind, they can't smell, they can't hear normally. They only perceive the world through targeting augurs, tactical readouts, and the dim, muffled psychic echoes of the living operators guiding them. It is a cold, disorienting, living death.
That is agonizing just to think about. You're subjecting your beloved grandparents to a sensory deprivation tank so they can fight on the front lines.
And it gets infinitely worse.
How could it get worse?
If a living Eldari dies in combat, their stone can usually be recovered. But if a wraith construct is hit by heavy Tyranid bioplasma or crushed by a massive Carnifex, the spirit stone itself can be shattered.
Wait, if the stone breaks?
If the stone breaks in real space, the soul is immediately dumped into the warp, right into the waiting jaws of that dark entity.
Oh my God.
By waking the dead, they aren't just drafting reserves, they are risking the absolute permanent obliteration of their ancestors' souls. They are risking eternal damnation for their family members just to win a firefight.
Okay, that changes the context entirely. That completely explains the tragedy. When they are pulling those stones out, they are violating their deepest, most sacred taboos. The true horror of Kraken isn't just that it physically destroyed the spires of the craft world. It's that the Tyranids applied so much kinetic pressure that they forced a deeply spiritual civilization to cannibalize its own afterlife just to survive the day.
It is a victory that costs them their soul, literally and metaphorically.
Man.
Ion survived the Tyranid assault, yes. But the accounts explicitly call it a broken realm. A society that is forced to desecrate its dead to survive the present has sacrificed its entire future. It is a Pyrrhic victory of the most tragic order. The Tyranids may not have consumed all of their biomass, but they completely consumed their cultural integrity.
It's incredibly bleak. It is a masterclass in grim cosmic horror. We've looked at these two massive campaigns simultaneously launched by Kraken's tendrils, the Pyrrhic victory of the elite Ultramarines at Ishur IV, and the spiritual devastation of the Eldari at Iyanden. In both cases, through unimaginable sacrifice, the defenders managed to break the invasion. Barely. But as we analyze the aftermath of this conflict, we realize that breaking a Tyranid Hive fleet is not the same thing as defeating it. Let's look at the legacy of Kraken and what happened after these battles.
This is where we see the final, long-term evolutionary benefit of the tendril strategy. If we look at Behemoth again, the single battering ram, when it was stopped, it was functionally destroyed. The threat was ended because all the biomass was in one place.
Right, a single point of failure, what we talked about.
Yeah, but Kraken was decentralized. The historical records outline that the defeats at Ishur V and Iyanden fragmented Hive Fleet Kraken. The main fleet structure was shattered, but the remnants didn't just die off, they splintered. And these splinter fleets drifted away from the battle zones, pushing deeper toward the galactic core.
And this reveals the ultimate failsafe built into Kraken's genetic design. It propagates through failure.
Exactly.
It's like if you have a massive, terrifying pane of glass suspended over your head, that's Kraken. And the Imperium and the Eldari take a hammer and they smash the glass. Congratulations, the big pane of glass is gone. But now you have thousands of razor-sharp shards raining down on everyone else.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. By breaking Kraken, the defenders inadvertently triggered its reproductive survival mechanism. A broken fleet is still a fleet of thousands of bioships just scattered across the void. Those splinter fleets, no matter how small they seem compared to the main tendril, are still apex predators.
Because if a splinter fleet drifts into a poorly defended, agri-world, a farming planet with a minimal defense force, it doesn't matter that it's a fraction of Kraken's original size. To that farming planet, it is still an apocalyptic event.
Exactly. The splinter fleets feed. They consume the biomass of these minor outposts and undefended worlds. They slowly regenerate their numbers. They act as a grim, constant background radiation of terror, a reminder that the Kraken is never truly gone.
And the accounts highlight that this legacy is twofold. First, it proved undeniably that the Tyranids are not mindless animals. They are a highly adaptable intelligence capable of complex strategy, infiltration, and psychological warfare. But the second part of the legacy is what should really keep the galaxy awake at night.
The prelude.
Yes, the prelude. Because the text explicitly states that Kraken, for all its horror, for all the shattered Space Marine veteran companies and broken Eldari craft worlds, was merely a prelude. It was a scouting mission for the even larger, more terrifying entity that is currently approaching, which is Hive Fleet Leviathan.
Let's follow the logical progression we've mapped out today. Behemoth was the blunt instrument. It failed. The hive mind absorbed the data of that failure. 250 years later, it produced Kraken, the cunning, infiltrating, decentralized hunter.
Right.
Kraken was eventually broken, but not before gathering an unfathomable amount of new data on how the galaxy defends itself. Therefore, we must logically assume that the incoming Hive Fleet Leviathan represents an unimaginable escalation.
They're absorbing data again. Yeah. The hive mind is processing everything that happened at Ishur IV and Iyanden right now.
Constantly. What did they learn from Kraken's demise? They learned that humanity can withstand internal subversion if they can deploy elite, heavily armored transhuman shock troops like the Space Marines.
Yeah.
They learned that the Eldari possess incredibly potent psychic weaponry and will weaponize their own dead if pushed to the brink. The hive mind knows this now. Leviathan will not make the same mistakes Kraken did. It will come equipped with countermeasures.
So, to summarize this incredible deep dive for you, the listener, Hive Fleet Kraken was the embodiment of the galaxy's greatest fear. It wasn't just a monster under the bed. It was the evolution of an already perfect predator. We watched them transform in real time from a hungry swarm charging headlong into guns, into a force of nature that learns, that adapts, and that seamlessly uses the galaxy's own populace against itself.
It's astounding.
They weaponized human genetics and dogmatic faith to build fifth column sleeper cells. They forced an ancient civilization to desecrate its ancestors' souls just to survive. The only thing more terrifying than an unstoppable monster is one that has learned exactly how you hunt and uses it against you.
It is a sobering, chilling reality. And as we conclude our analysis of this evolutionary nightmare today, I want to leave you with one final question to ponder.
Let's hear it.
Something that builds entirely on the mechanics of tyrannid adaptation that we've just discussed. We know that Kraken evolved its cunning strategy of infiltration and flanking by learning from the tactical failure of Behemoth. They adapted their military formations based on the data of their defeat.
Right. They learned the tactical doctrines of the galaxy.
But what if their adaptation goes beyond just military strategy? The Tyranids don't just observe their enemies through a telescope, right?
Yep.
They consume them.
Yep. They eat them.
They break down their prey at a molecular level. They absorb the biomass and, crucially, the genetic secrets of every species they devour.
Oh, wait.
Consider the implications. What genetic traits, what biological secrets are they absorbing right now from the elite, genetically engineered, ultramarine veterans they slaughtered and consumed on Akar IV?
The first company.
The first company. What psychic engineering and neuroplasticity are they gleaning from the Eldari they devoured on Iondan? The next time they arrive in the form of Leviathan, will they merely outsmart the galaxies tactically? Or will they have biologically weaponized the very resilience, armor plating, and psychic power that the galaxy just used to defeat them?
Are they going to show up with bioforms that have the dense bone structure and armored carapace of a space marine? Or creatures that can project psychic blasts like an Aldari warlock?
Oh.
That is a haunting thought to leave on. You think you beat the monster, only to realize you just handed it the blueprints to your best weapons.
It's entirely possible.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. I hope this exploration completely changed how you look at evolution and maybe makes you a little more appreciative of the fact that here in our world, the evolutionary clock is still comfortably ticking in millions of years and not overnight. Keep questioning the universe around you, keep looking for the mechanics behind the monsters, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.